a big part of the reason why I run Stemettes and do so much that I do, that we can't even imagine, you know, a black person doing mathematics, right? When I did Countdown, that was a massive thing. How dare people realize they were allergic to black women doing maths, seeing me doing the numbers every day on national television. And you can't even imagine that. We've not, let alone the fact that that's a reality. Black women have done maths. They've been doing maths, but we've not shared those stories. We've not told that. We've not reflected that back to the young people that we have in our schools. And it's not just about the black girls seeing that black women do maths. It's about everybody being able to see it. So we don't all have this allergic reaction, but so that actually we can be liberated by some of the ideas that might come from a black mathematician, in the same way that we've been liberated by ideas that have come from white mathematicians, that have come from people that are dead, that have come from people that are alive, that have come from people with beards and without beards.
Stemenism, the Equity in STEM podcast, sponsored by the Royal Society of Chemistry, where we hold conversations about race representation in STEM with the greatest minds in industry and academia. Hello and welcome to Stemenism, the Equity in STEM podcast, where we have conversations around race representation while we level the playing field in science,
technology,
engineering,
and mathematics.
Excellent. So today we have the pleasure of being joined by one of the leading voices, if not the leading voice for women in tech. And honestly, that does extend to STEM as a whole. So she's a black woman in technology who represents just 0.7% of black working women in the UK.
Damn.
Crazy statistic. She had her maths GCSE at age 10.
Jeez.
And was, as far as I'm aware, the youngest person to graduate with a master's degree in the UK in maths and computer science. No small feat.
One of, yeah. It's the full sentence, yeah.
One of. At least I said if I'm correct. So thank you for sliding that in. She's an established author, a public speaker, a podcast host, and a change maker in every right, really. She's leading the conversation regarding race-related bias in AI and cautioning all of us, but most importantly, women, to become interested in tech. She is the CEO and founder of Stemettes, which is a platform who inspire and support young girls and non-binary people to reach success in STEAM, which is STEM plus arts and design, actively dismantling the limitations of gender bias, racial and social inequity. I'm almost done. She was the former president of the British Science Association. She's a trustee for the Institution of Future Work. She is also a chair of the UD Music Foundation. And finally, a council member for the College of Art. You may have seen her on Countdown, maybe at a tech conference. You may have read a book. She's in control. Ladies and gents, we have the pleasure of being joined by Anne-Marie Imafidon. Hey. We got to sing your flowers, though, because they're serious. This is like a pretty extensive list. And really, really, really amazing to see. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
So, pleasure. So,
how are you doing? Should we get straight into it?
Let's do it. Let's dive in.
Okay, so we like to kind of go back in time, hit the old time machine, start at the beginning, and we know that you grew up in East London. Can you tell us a bit about the family dynamics that shaped you back in that time, the smells, the sounds, the sights, and how that led you to where you are today?
The smells is a good one to start with, actually. No one ever asks me that. The smells, there's always food. We're always eating in our house or having people around or biscuits and drinks or whatever it might be. So the smells was definitely, there was always food. There was the smell of food. The sounds, it was very loud. I'm the eldest of 5. And so at various points in my childhood, it was either baby, which is, baby noises. My parents had twins. So that was also incredibly loud, as you can imagine, but also British Nigerian. And so all of the things that you can imagine, whether it's having, church group at our house, all the different things that you can imagine you might have had, we had. We're happy people. We like to enjoy ourselves. And then sounds wise, I guess the other thing is, we had 2 TVs. I say this all the time. And every single time I say it, I remember, then I forget to ask my dad why. But there was always something. Something was always happening. Something was always going on. And I think that shaped quite a lot of what I enjoy as experiences now that I create and I get to cultivate. But I think the other kind of big thing that maybe is different from most places is that we were indulged as children to explore, to try things out, to break things maybe every now and then, as long as it was under the guise of us trying to understand what was going on. And it's something that now, I don't have children of my own, but get to meet a lot of people and speak to a lot of parents. And I think there's always that fear of the unknown or fear of them breaking things, or it's just annoying, right? If your phone is broken for the 3rd time in a row, right? Because your child was trying to figure out something that's inside. But my parents seemed to kind of just let us get on with it. So I think that's definitely it. There was very few boundaries.
Cool. Yeah, that's really cool. Like, I guess, a melting pot of culture and also opportunity. It sounds like it's really nice to have parents who let you explore and be curious in that way. So you mentioned there's 5 of you in the house, 5 kids in the house, with twins as well. And I think you're all geniuses, as far as I've read. So what's
Everyone's
the formula?
a genius, really. If you read to the end of that sentence as well, right?
Everyone's a genius, but not everyone did their A levels at age 13 or like entered high school at age 6. So there's definitely something that sticks out a little bit. So. What was there? Was it in the water? Is it maybe you can testify to like the value of education in your family.
I mean, definitely. With the background that we have, education is always going to be the most important, right? Nigerians as a set of folks are incredibly educated. I think for us, it's an interesting one. Folks are like, were you competitive? All these kinds of things, and it's about norms, which is so much of what we do at Stemettes. And anyone that is able to come to an event or has kind of engaged with us before knows that in that space, that norm of normally it's just boys, or normally it's just this type of person, gets suspended and is different. And in our space, no, everyone's here. Whoever you are in the space, we're getting technical, we're learning these things, or we're exploring the science, or we're playing with the maths. And so I think in our house, we still have this till today, even though there's an 11-year age difference between myself and the youngest. If she can do it, then why can't I do it? We're drinking the same water, eating the same food, watching the same television. Yeah, Amory's not that special. And we literally still have that now in so many things that I end up doing. I'm like, oh, okay, you're here too. Wow, okay, you got that flat as well. Okay, right. And so I think it's about that norms, right? So many folks say if you can see it, you can be it. And I think that's definitely something that we had as siblings, but that now I feel really fortunate and privileged to be able to give to lots of different folks. Because as we're saying, talent is equally distributed and opportunities not. But being able to be in that space where taking those opportunities, not taking for granted that you're always going to be able to make the most of them, or you're always going to win at everything, or you're always going to succeed in everything, but you've got to be in it to win it. And I think that's definitely something that we have had reinforced in quite a big way again and again and again amongst ourselves, not even just about the input of our parents.
Coming through with the quotables already,
Oh no, the gems are flowing, and it takes me back to our interview with Robert Makaya as well, who was similar in the fact that I think when he was in Kenya, his older siblings were the only ones that went to university. They travelled away from Kenya to Cambridge to go to university, but it became normal in that family. So it's kind of internalizing those norms and making that environment a safe and constructive space, which I love. And takes me to the next question, and also one of the interviews we saw about you getting involved with the VCR player back at age 4. Is that where your curiosity for SEM started? Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Definitely. I think I've had that curiosity. Everyone has a curiosity. I think everyone has a curiosity for STEM. They just don't know it, right? Back then I didn't know that that was STEM. I didn't know that that would lead to any kind of career. I just wanted to know, where did Timon and Pumbaa come from? Because I can't see them on the sticker. So I think that was one thing. I think the other story I always end up talking about is changing the story of Little Red Riding Hood from red to purple and typing that on my dad's computer, storing that in Word 3.0 as it was then, right? And then, the idea that my probable gobbledygook, because, spelling is hard at times and all the rest of it, is there and is living on, but it's because I typed those letters in that sequence. It's saved as a file. It's a real thing. I think all of this is what STEM is about, right? You have that knowledge, you might discover something, and then you apply it somewhere else. And I think there's till today, in all the different spaces, all the things you kind of listed off there at the beginning, Ali, like all of those are, how do I understand what's going on here? And then if we know that, what is the change, or what are the things that we're going to build, or what are the problems we're going to be able to solve if we understand how these institutions work, right? Or how this space works. And so, it's interesting because now it's kind of in the STEM space, but it's not what folks would traditionally consider STEM, but it's still that STEM approach. It's still that STEM toolkit, and it's still applying it to life because believe it or not, like life is harder than maths. I say this all the time. And so, there's so many things you might do in a small, sanitized, simplified environment that actually by the time you take it out into the real world, life is more complicated than that. And so you better understand the fullness of it so you can build a solution, right? Or you can get creative in a way that then is not destructive, right? Because you've got a full-on understanding of what's going on.
Life is harder than maths. That can go on a T-shirt. Let's get that sorted.
I think there's like a healthy fear of maths and maybe even tech. And one thing I feel like resonates, and I think I also heard on an interview on GMTV, the twins talking about it, like their approach to maths and possibly also tech is making it play.
Yeah.
So wondering if you can speak to the power of play when it comes to becoming comfortable with tech.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, the power of play. So play, as children, we learn through play, right? We learn through exploration, but you play with others, you play with things, and you're able to discover new. You play with boundaries as children, right? And again, it's quite frustrating as an adult or parent in that scenario, but that's what they're trying to do. It's a way to explore. And I think so often in the STEM space and in the STEAM space, maybe less so, we forget about that joy and about that playing and about that exploration. And I think for a lot of folks, the main engagement that they have with STEM, if you don't have that science capital, as I'm sure you kind of covered on the podcast before, for a lot of folks, that's about school and that's about the curriculum and that's about classroom. And of course, most classrooms are not about play. And so then we end up thinking that STEM is not about play, whereas actually there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of play, there's a lot of playfulness that is part of it when you get to explore it in different spaces outside of just school. And so again, with a lot of what I'm doing and a lot of what we do at Stemettes, it's like, yeah, come and have, we end up, the kind of big words we end up using for it is that it's come and have a positive, formative STEM experience in a space that you might not have necessarily had at school, where you can see that, okay, we're still scientists here talking about, I don't know, climate change or coding or whatever it is, but we're enjoying, there is mistakes that are made, there are lessons that are learned, but all of that is part of the process, and that's a good thing. Whereas at school, often it's like, no, you must get this right, and you must get that grade, and you must, and it's like, well, no, life isn't like that, right? I love maths, but there are elements of maths that I hate. And that's okay, right? You don't have to love the entirety of it to be able to say that that's something you like or you understand or is within your reach. So I think play is super important, and it's really, really tough for teachers actually, with everything else that they've got going on in the classroom, to have the space to allow folks to play. And so we see what we do is really, really important to give folks that space where they might not be able to do it if their parent hasn't necessarily been able to see the playful side of STEM and STEAM as well.
What I sort of that is that the education system itself is set up to stifle our curiosity, whether correctly or incorrectly, because I feel like play is part of curiosity, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's the education system, but also it's a function of the society that it's operating in. And, you know, I know you've got folks from different institutions, the conversations that we're now having even just about STEM education. I was at dinner a couple of weeks ago and we were talking about what happens if across the education system, rather than it being in just subjects, we do it kind of across themes, but also rather than grading folks, what if we just assess them without it being leading to a grade, right? And there was this big kind of sharp inhale of, and it's like, okay, but how will we put people in order and in boxes, and it's those kinds of things that, again, as a society, we've been built on this class system. There's all these structures that have been built in, right, to maintain power and concentrate it in particular places. And so why wouldn't the education system then follow along in that, right? Why wouldn't the preservation of that education system then be something that we continue to see? And I guess the frustrating thing is, as again, I'm sure you'll have explored with folks before, is, we're therefore not preparing folks for the future because we're reflecting on what has happened in the past. And that can only go on for so long without it really blowing up in our faces, right? But it's a thing to work out. How will we assess going forward, right? How do you set a curriculum? How do you ensure standards? How do you make sure that you create folks that are more well-adjusted rather than, backtracking in that change? And how do you make sure it's a change that's equitable? I said the swear word, right? How do you make sure it's a change that's good and is progressive, right? And makes things better. So, there's all of those things that we still need to figure out and be able to do at scale, because it's quite a big country and quite a big system with quite a lot of different folks, and we don't want to make any moves that kind of put anyone backward from where they need to be or where they are at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges as well. It's not just a STEAM issue. It's not just a science issue. It's pretty much a global issue. And I recall one of your church aunties referring to your work as your little techie things at the time. What do you think there are kind of cultural limitations in play, or society that not only affect Black people, but also maybe women in tech and certain perceptions? Have you had any challenges in that regard?
So I think there definitely are, and I think, it's funny. It's always interesting to try and reflect on my story, and I know that I'm one person of, Ali, you were saying, kind of one of 0.7%, right? And so I think it's always interesting. My experiences and with the privilege that I have aren't necessarily those of many folks, and so always try to kind of extrapolate from the group and from the kind of wider set and data set that we have. I think there definitely are quite a lot of barriers that we have, and I end up summarizing them as the social norms that we have around who does science and who has done the tech. I've got my book, She's in Control, and I talk so much about the HERstory of STEM, right? And the people that have gone before. And last year, Stemettes was 10, and we did a series of roundtables across the country with lots of different stakeholders looking at the curriculum and the stories we tell of who does the science and whose names are in the curriculum and are in textbooks and whose names aren't, right? And who should be and who shouldn't, right? A couple of years ago, I ended up working on a children's maths book project called How to Be a Maths Whiz. And it's so interesting going through that process with kind of other publishers and talking to folks beforehand, with us saying, okay, this is the curriculum that we want to cover because it's key stage 1. This is what maths looks like. And also these are, you might want to include some people, and kind of start listing off, I don't know, Archimedes and all the usual suspects. And I'm like, okay, we've heard enough. There are others that we can talk about. I'm sure Archimedes will be fine if we write this book and we talk about Benjamin Banneker, right? Who literally, was so smart that he saw a clock mechanism and built a clock by hand himself. And this is someone that was born to a slave, if not born a slave himself, right? Yeah. And so there's all these stories that folks don't get to tell. Gladys West, I'm constantly talking about Gladys West, Anti-Gladys and GPS, or, all of these things. And so I think there's a frustration that I've had, and there's a big part of the reason why I run Stemettes and do so much that I do, that we can't even imagine a Black person doing mathematics, right? When I did Countdown, that was a massive thing. How dare people realize they were allergic to Black women doing maths, seeing me doing the numbers every day on national television. And you can't even imagine that. We've not, let alone the fact that that's a reality. Black women have done maths. They've been doing maths, but we've not shared those stories. We've not told that. We've not reflected that back to the young people that we have in our schools. And it's not just about the Black girls seeing that Black women do maths. It's about everybody being able to see it. So we don't all have this allergic reaction, but so that actually we can be liberated by some of the ideas that might come from a Black mathematician, in the same way that we've been liberated by ideas that have come from white mathematicians, that have come from people that are dead, that have come from people that are alive, that have come from people with beards and without beards. And so I think that ends up being the barrier that then permeates into the way that we make decisions on recruitment, the way that we decide the way that we kind of interact, let's say in academic spaces with people in particular research groups, the way that we build our curricula, right up to the top of, what are we teaching in those biology lectures about the brains of one race versus the brains of another, and it permeates into all of these places. And so I think if we fix the idea of the stories and those norms, then we will begin, as well as all the structural things that need to happen, we will begin to see those changes. That means that we're able to allow that talent, wherever it resides, to thrive, rather than it just sticking to this incredibly narrow vision, an idea of what success looks like, which is that you have to be dead and white and male with a beard in order to have anything of value to contribute in this space. And I'm not calling anyone out in particular, but there are certain institutes, looking at anyone that, you turn up at their building and all the eyes are just following you around the building, right? Of these dead white guys with beards. And it's like, okay, cool. But if I'm alive, there's got to be something I can't grow a beard, but I'm pretty sure that my maths is still okay. And I think that's the message that we really do need to get out to everyone, not just the little black girls.
Yeah. Fully agree. I mean, we started Vanta STEM singing Black scientific excellence and really trying to tell the stories of, some of the people that you've just touched on now. It is tragic how we've just excluded this from not only our curriculums, but you said the swear word earlier when we mentioned equity. It seems like black is also a bit of a swear word for some reason. And we really need to get over this hang up because it's so stupid. But glad that we have people like you. There's many others who are really resharing this message and highlighting the HERstory and also the experience of black people in STEM. So you mentioned old white people with beards. Can we talk about gatekeepers for a minute? Because I really enjoyed. I listened to your book. I didn't read it. I'm sorry. It's on the back there. She's
so
in
good.
control.
Not had enough of my voice. That's why I'm here now.
That's it. Yeah, no. I really enjoyed it. It was and I think there's something really great about digesting information and having someone tell it to you. Mm-hmm. But gatekeepers. So can you maybe just explore for a little bit how gatekeeping began in tech, as far as you're aware? And maybe are there any other issues that you can see that stand out, which are barriers to women both entering and progressing in STEM?
Okay, sure. So with gatekeeping, I think gatekeeping, again, and all of this really goes back to power, which I'm sure is something you'll kind of have explored quite a lot on the podcast, right? The maintenance of power, the preservation of power, the idea of power needing to be concentrated and not necessarily shared, but being held and being hoarded by particular types of folks, means that there's behaviour that we see again and again through civilization, and particularly in fields. There are a lot of folks for whom elitism and preserving systems of elitism has, been in their favour for the power that they want to hold in a particular space. And I think what's interesting about the tech industry is where it looks like it's new. Obviously, it didn't come of its own, right? I love being a maths and computer scientist because I get to broach the two sides. But, when I was studying, a lot of the folks that were my computer science kind of academics had studied maths. And this was a field that had come out of decision maths and quite a lot of other things. And so there are a lot of behaviours and structures that have then been inherited, we can say, from kind of the academic space and scientific academic space, that then play out quite a lot then in an industry that then has come obviously from a lot of those lessons that were learned and those norms that were set and those behaviours that were normal. So when we look at gatekeeping, it's the same sort of things of, okay, you haven't met these markers, and sometimes they're arbitrary, sometimes they're real, but everything kind of gets clouded together, where it's like, oh, you didn't have a Nintendo 64 or gaming console where you learnt to blow inside the cartridge. So now when we're using the cartridge at work, you don't recognise that that's what we need to do for maintenance. If you're a gamer, you're going to be great at this. But if you're never game, then there's all of these concepts you're never going to know or never going to understand, right? Or whether it's, oh, you weren't here years ago when we did COBOL, and so therefore you're not going to be eligible to now, start this role. We have had this. I get to talk to companies all the time. There was one organisation I ended up speaking to who were telling me about a problem they'd had with their hiring managers, and there were all manner of things that they were telling me. One of the examples was someone was about to retire. I'll call him Bob. And Bob had spent 5 years trying to find his replacement. And they kind of were going through it with Bob. And it's like, Bob was trying to hire another Bob. But it's like, Bob, guess what? You're retiring. So if you're looking for another you, they are also retiring. So this is now a false errand. They don't need to have been here 40 years ago working on the Pascal in order to be good enough to replace you here, because that's not coming back round again, right? And so I think there's a lot of gatekeeping that gets in the way, and often it gets in the way of that person and what they're trying to do in their legacy. But even more so, you see it with folks trying to step into a space where, oh, okay, if you've not got those other markers that we have, we take those as a proxy for what value looks like. And so then folks end up gatekeeping. And like I said, they're doing it because they're trying to preserve a power, or they're trying to hold on to something that has formed such a big part of their identity, that I am the science person. So what am I without the science? Or what am I without the technology? Or what am I if I allow in someone who knows a language that wasn't here 50 years ago? And so I think there's a sense of value that goes missing, but it is about that power. It is about power maintenance. And it's about, preying on people's ignorance. Yeah, okay, I'm not a gamer. I didn't blow the cartridge. So, and sometimes you do feel like, oh goodness, I really didn't. I wish I was here and I wish I was a gamer. And other times it's like, well, if you recognize that person's gatekeeping, then you can know, okay, you weren't a gamer, but if we take the example of Legally Blonde, you know all about perms, and that's going to be the way that you win this legal case. And I think that's what we are kind of coming up against, and that's the kind of the resource and the things that we have to lean on ourselves when we're coming into a space that's being gatekept. But I think the other thing I'll do as a bit of advice is that STEM itself as a field is so broad, so diverse, and is evolving so much that at any given point, you're actually quite fortunate if you're someone that's coming from that STEM background or has some kind of STEM literacy, that you have options. And so if there's a particular space that is looking like they're just going to tolerate you, barely, let alone even, or they're going to just let you in, then actually you've got options to be like, what is the space they're going to celebrate me? What is the space that actually is looking for someone like me, looking for my experience, looking for my perspective? Don't waste the time trying to fight against the gatekeeper to prove to them that Black women have done maths. No. There's a space where they're going to be okay with me doing that. That's where I'm going to go. And I'm going to work on finding those spaces for me to go in and thrive. Or if I've got the agency, building spaces that others can come in and thrive in.
Yeah, and I think that leads nicely into our next question as well. And as you said, breaking the molds, doing things that others haven't done before is so refreshing to see. A Black CEO, a Black female CEO as well, and also one that shows up so authentically as well. I remember the first time seeing you on Countdown. I think we were in lockdown at the time, and I almost had to do a bit of a double take. I was like, wow, this woman looks like me, and she's great at the numbers as well, as you said. That's probably what made people most mad, that they have all these things that they think and they want to believe, and actually you were amazing. And I remember watching it with my daughter, and actually we're coming to our first Stemettes event tomorrow. So can you tell us a bit about Stemettes, the vision, the plan, and how it's going?
Sure. So with Stemettes, I, as I said, had a really privileged upbringing, and I know that I'm not special. So if there were other folks that are put in that same scenario, I know there are a lot of folks that would have swam rather than sunk. And even if you do sink, let's be honest, you're a 10-year-old doing a GCSE, you weren't supposed to be there in the first place, so no biggie, right? With Stemettes, I've always been really conscious that, I'm not special. And so if you give other folks those opportunities and give as many as possible for them to just try these things out, you'd be surprised at what happens. But also you'd be able to kind of, like I said, give them that formative, positive experience that means that they're able to make decisions far, far off into the future based on, I came to that hack, I'd never coded before, I built an app and we won a prize. And so with Stemettes, the whole idea is, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how much money you have, it doesn't matter whether you've spelt science or seen science before, it's free to attend, it's fun to be there, we have food, which goes a long way. And why not open up that HERstory? Why not allow you to explore it in a different way to what you've seen in the curriculum? Why not have fun with it and play with it? Why not try? We had our annual report out last week, and we had about 100 young people gain adult qualifications in Agile, Python, and Cyber across the last 12 months.
Wow.
And this is teenagers doing it over half term. And, there's not enough newspapers to have the headlines, right? 13-year-old from Sheffield does this, and it's that thing of, I'm not special. Like, let's give folks those opportunities. Let's see what happens, and allow them to see themselves in a different way, allow them to understand and kind of counter some of those narratives that they'll have seen of, if you do physics, you're going to be the first girl ever in the country to do A-level physics. Yes, you'll be one of a few, but you won't be alone. And why not build that space for you to come and feel a sense of belonging? Right? For you to celebrate with folks, commiserate with folks, share opportunities, build each other up, but also learn some of those skills that are going to give you that staying power in the industry if you do decide to then step into the STEM field. With this art, and also with the fact that we're so open, it's also that I know not everyone's going to be a STEM person fully. Like, I understand that. That's completely fine. And of course, we need that across society, a diversity of skills. But actually, if you see yourself not as a STEM person, at least have an understanding of what part of this isn't for you, but again, what part of this is for you. There are elements of STEM that are really helpful in history. There's so much of what we do in STEM that is about expression or understanding, which is what art's all about. And so get to see that it's not just about the subjects, that kind of that's double maths and that's chemistry and that's physics, but see that life is about, dipping into all of those and trying all of them out. And so at Stemettes, it's kind of, you're not forcing you to do anything or continue on with anything. It's kind of try before you buy, right? But you're doing that in a really relaxed, really fun, food-filled, joyous environment. So that later on, if stuff does go wrong, you can be like, do you know what? I know that there's that environment, not the STEM itself.
Yeah. Oh, really,
the
really
number
inspiring.
of events I turned up for just because of the free food is amazing.
This is it.
Yeah, not to be underestimated.
I think it gets people comfortable, right? You can have conversations,
Exactly.
yeah. I think creating a relaxed environment to grow in is really, really powerful. I mean, I hated chemistry when I was growing up, and now 15 years later, I work as a chemical consultant. So it's all about those positive experiences. So yeah, kudos to you and the team. Doing amazing work over 10 years running as well. Come on, let's go. So yeah, if you hadn't already realized from the intro, everyone listening, while you say you're not special, you have done quite a lot of things, and you do wear an extraordinary number of hats. So what's your source? How do you stay afloat in dabbling in all of these different areas? And also, which one is your favorite hat to wear?
Oh, my favourite hat is Stemettes. No, hands down. Being at the events is my favourite place. In fact, tomorrow is, as at the event tomorrow, Clive, that's my happy place. That's my decompression from all the stresses of everything else that goes on in the week. When I'm at the events, that is my, other people go for massages, I go to Stemettes events. That's my spot, that's my space, that's my jam. How do I do it? I don't know. I have systems, I have processes, I try, I fail, I try again, we evolve. I have a great team. I have a great set of teams around me on kind of each of those organizations, and my own central team. And, we take a day at a time, and we live and we learn. And sometimes I'm on the wrong time zone. Other times I've not got that note up, but, I think it's all additive, right? I always say I love maths, I love tech, I love helping people. And there's got to be a legacy, there's got to be a change, there's got to be something, I've got to leave the world differently to how I saw it. And so all of these things add up. Any new space I'm entering into, and there'll be other news, I'm sure, out by the time that the podcast comes out, but any space I'm stepping into, it's like, okay, cool, this is all to that overall mission of, we can't accidentally kill ourselves in this robot apocalypse because you just didn't have other people in the room who called out things that just were a bit off. There wasn't someone there being like, okay, we're gonna build a tool that allows anybody to say anything to anyone at any time. And there was nobody in that room that thought, let me give you 5 reasons from this morning alone why that might not be a good idea. There's so many things. It's like, okay, cool. Who was there when you were making that decision? Who did you have in the room that was something you thought was going to be okay, or was going to have anything other than not ending well? And so that's why I keep doing it. But I mean, I can't say I do all of it perfectly. I can't say it's all 100% of the time that I'm doing 100% of them. But it's you show up, right? And you do your best, right? You work at it, you live and you learn, you keep learning. You're disciplined, right? You have systems set up in place that I'm not at any meeting unless I'm taking notes, right? And I've got all of that in. I've got my reminders, I've got my action points, all of those small kind of productivity things. I'm not multitasking. I'm only ever doing one thing at once. Like all of those, you have them work together. I mean, unless I'm on a plane. Normally I'll write and read on a plane, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, don't be afraid to fail. And maybe don't take yourself too seriously as well. I think there's
I always say that I should take myself more seriously. I don't take myself very seriously.
You seem to be doing all right, to be honest. So something's working. You mentioned the robot apocalypse. Oh God, this terrifies me. I don't know, Clive, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, there's loads of questions we could ask you. We could be here all day, but we'll stick to the last couple. I think as you've touched on that kind of robot apocalypse piece, game-changing technology, VR, AR, AI, deep face, all these different new things that are coming into play. Can you talk about the importance of inclusion and why, for example, we need phones that can recognize Black people's faces as well as other people's faces, and how these things kind of come arise and then people are left out and we end up with robots taking over?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, and sometimes it's a human thing of you stick to what you know, right? Or you value what you have and what you do if you respect yourself enough, right? So I think with any technology, and this year it'll be AI. Last year it was blockchain. Next year it'll be Hygge Hagga. The year after it'll be Google Gaga. Like there's always going to be something, right? That someone's like, oh, why do we try? Okay, cool. Like here's a progress that we've made on this, and now we can do it quantum. So, okay, cool. If we can do that, 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, however, exponentially faster, then what are we going to do? And I think it's one of those things that you can run so fast, and you've got the old African proverb, right? You can run fast if you go alone, but you run further if you go together. And you insert the name of the proverb here, right? But I think it's that thing of, if you forget certain people exist, but you're building technology at a time like now where technology is driving so much of a change, then eventually it is going to get to those people. Eventually it is going to get to a woman's hands. And you've built a period tracker that only tracks 10 days of their period. Like that's going to happen eventually. And so why not get that while you're in your development process, rather than having egg on your face later on where you've discovered the period, but you also haven't discovered the length of it or any actual details about what the period is, right? And that's without us talking about menopause, pregnancy, all these other things that are part of life. If you don't have anyone or don't know anyone that's ever been through any of them, and you happen to be building technology that's going to be in a world where that exists, then you're kind of limiting your own innovation and the scope of what you can do and the scale of your legacy by forgetting that exists. And so it's important for Black people to be able to be recognised by an automatic hand towel dispenser, because guess what? Black people need towels when they go to the loo the same way as anybody else that you'd have trained that data set on needs to. And so it's a mistake that we continuously make, and it's not always even purely about race, right? There's all manner of different folks that get forgotten. In the book, I have the example of someone who has the title doctor and can't open the locker in the gym because they're in the women's changing room, right? You've got voice recognition systems that still don't understand folks that have Scottish accents. And there are Black people that have Scottish accents. There are white people that have Scottish accents. How is it that Siri still doesn't understand what they're saying when they're talking to Siri? And so, it's this same mistake again and again and again and again and again. And part of it is about power. Who is in power and who is worth it, right? Who is in that definition of human as per the folks who have power. And so what matters as a human problem and what doesn't matter as a human problem. But I think it's super important for us to ensure that, we don't have this destruction by ensuring that A, we're in those spaces, or B, we're making sure that our data is being valued in that space and not being taken advantage of, right, or plundered in the way that we have been in the past. And I think that's so important. It's not something just for us as kind of the minoritized folks to be doing, but I think there is something about systemic change that we can do to ensure that we set our standards better, right? And we enforce our standards in a better way, and we don't have folks in power that actively trying to work against that maintenance of standards or establishment of standards.
Yeah, we need to cut it off at the stem. To be honest, it's stupid for business as well. It doesn't really make sense. Like,
Doesn't.
you wonder how no one called them out on this. On the way during the innovation process. It's quite
You
wild.
wonder, and then you turn up in the spaces, and then you see them, and then you're like, do you know what? Actually, this is why I'm going to fight to be in this space, because that's really simple for me, and it's really hard for all of you. And actually, that's not even the biggest amount of value that I have in my life experiences as a human being. So I think this is the thing, folks. I don't know. We're standing on business, right? This is why you do need to step into those places, and sometimes just your presence winds people up, but often just your presence brings a lot of innovation into that space. The other example I'll give, and I talk about this in the book, is that of bras. So I have a friend who's a developer who was working on a retail site. And for anyone that doesn't know, with bra sizing, in most countries around the world, you have 2 digits and either one character or 2 characters. And she's kind of trying to explain this to the developers in her team, who are kind of looking as if it's a system that she's invented. And end up not believing her. And so till today on that website, they sell bras in extra small, medium and large. And you can imagine you're not selling a lot of bras by doing that. But, as a woman turning up in that space, she didn't invent the bra sizing system. She was a developer and had a lot more value. And if you can't hear her on that, what else is she bringing to the table that you're not hearing? And it's just ridiculous in business. Why are you paying people if you're not going to listen to them? Like, what's the point? Why are you building products without that insight and that knowledge of the folks that are wanting them and needing them? Why are you creating things that pretend that there's entire continents or races of people that don't exist? It literally doesn't make sense.
You're totally right. Yeah, I don't even know what to say about it other than people need to become more interested in all of these things so that we can approach it and tackle it. You mentioned data when you were talking a moment ago. Data is an interesting one. Like, I found it very, very difficult to even dig up that statistic of 0.7%. How is like the lack of data, particularly in the UK, I think, because you get really good data sets in America when it comes to Black people and representation because they've been engaged in the topic. It's not perfect, but it's particularly terrible in the UK. So do you feel like the lack of data is doing people a disservice in some way, specifically around, let's say, Black people and women in tech?
Yeah, I mean, the lack of data does a disservice in everywhere. There's a great book called Invisible Women that talks a lot about what would happen if we gender disaggregate data and the kinds of decisions that we'd make. Because when you kind of aggregate things, you kind of take an average, right? As mathematicians, we can't even agree on one average. And so the idea that you're building anything for the average, whatever, like it ends up meaning that you make a decision that often actually doesn't work for most people, let alone it just working for a particular type of group. So I think the lack of data, I talk about in the book as well, Black Ballad, and what they're doing around kind of collecting data on a number of different things, a number of different spheres within the Black female and Black women experience. But I think, that lack of data does end up getting in the way because data drives a lot of decisions. Data itself is not neutral, and there are a lot of folks who use data to drive decisions that forget that actually data is rarely collected in a vacuum. Often it's collected with particular ways and limitations, with a particular view in mind or kind of endpoint in mind. And so actually not all data is created equal, right? Also, historically, there's a lot of data we haven't had. And so it means that often we're starting literally from zero. So again, another example would have been when my best friend got married on the marriage register in this country, they only took the father's occupation. They didn't take the mother's occupation. Her father wasn't part of her life. And I think it's things like this that it's like, now, okay, fine, I got married. My father and my mother's occupations are on the marriage register, but that's only the last couple of years that's something we've got. So there's an entire data set of all time. We just don't have that information. And so how do you make decisions based on that if you literally started yesterday? So I think it's super important to have that data, but just as much, like I said, data is what you decide to measure, right? So, if you want to collect data on the best sandwich flavor to sell in your lunch shop that you are setting up, that doesn't cover off that some people might have jollof rice or rice and peas for lunch, right? And so often it's not just about the data and the data sets, it's also about who you have making those decisions on where that data is being deployed, right? And what data we even think is important. So yeah, it's a big battleground. I think it's also not the be all and end all on everything, because again, data doesn't represent everything. There's so much, life is more complicated than maths. There's so much that we're not actually able to measure that matters just as much as the things we are able to measure. There are some things that are incredibly complex to measure, reference it in the book, but, GDP doesn't take into account the unpaid labour of unpaid labour in the home. Does that mean that unpaid labour is not important to an economy? Of course not, right? But, and so I think there's quite a lot of that there's so much room for us to get better at. We're at 11 o'clock, by the way.
This has been a masterclass. And everyone listening, I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for joining us. It's really, really been amazing. You should consider taking up stand-up comedian as one of your other roles because you're really funny. I've been cracking up.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, add that to the list of accolades. You could be filling out the O2 before you know it. Ali, do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah. Nothing really else to say. Thank you so much for being with us today, and to everyone who checked in and listened to the episode. It's been Anne-Marie Imafidon. Make sure you read She's in Control. Go grab that right now. Check out Stemettes and the work that they're doing. Support them in any way that you can. And hopefully we can touch base again sometime in the future. I'd love to connect and get some more of these gems because you're really, really giving them. Thank you. Thank you so much. And until next time.
Thank you.
Peace and many blessings.